All right, good evening. This is going to be Group 3's roundtable on the relationship between joint shape and the development of osteoarthritis. I'm Seul.
I'm Diamond.
I'm Vivian. I'm Sayari.
My name's Alan.
And we're going to be ready to kick this off. And it's going to start with me. I'm Seul. I'm going to be going over the abstract portion and the introduction portion of the relationship between the joints shape and the development of osteoarthritis. So an overview that we're going to start with is the focus, which is I found that the document investigates the correlation between joint shape, particularly hip joint architecture, and the onset of osteoarthritis. That's going to be the main focal point that we'll be talking about between all of us in this group roundtable here. And just to give a note to the authors, it's Julie C. Baker Lapon and Nancy E. Lane, and they are both from the University of California, San Francisco, Department of Internal Medicine, Center for Healthy Aging, and UC Davis Medical Center, Sacramento, California, USA. So to get it kicked off, right, some of the key points that I found within the first half of this section are the genetic contributions, which basically entails that osteoarthritis of the hip has significant genetic components with genes from the wingless traits and the BMP families playing a crucial roles. So all that gene makeup is going to have some sort of detriment or determining factor that enables that osteoarthritis to come in on those middle to older age groups. The architectural features is another key point that I came up with as well. Characteristics like acetabular dysplasia, which is basically that portion within the hip where the head of your femur goes in, and certain deformities can alter the shape of that and result in degradation of those functions. The pistol grip deformity, just in the name, it's really elongated and doesn't form in the acetabular very well. The wide femoral neck and altered femoral neck shaft angles are critical into the pathogenesis of arthritis. And then the gene environment interaction, both the genetic and environmental factors, including lifestyle and joint injuries, influence the development and progression of osteoarthritis. And second to last point is the molecular pathways. Wingless traits in the BMP pathways are central to both the joint shape and determination of osteoarthritis development. And lastly, the variations in joint shape. Several hip shapes variations such as developmental dysplasia and acetabular dysplasia are linked to an increase in the risks of osteoarthritis. And for a potential question that I saw for myself was kind of like, how come certain populations, for an example, like in women or African Americans and some Europeans are more prone to osteoarthritis than others? And basically a large determinant is the lifestyle. You know, like blue collar workers, they move around a lot, they jump, they lift heavy things, climb up ladders. So that can alter the acetabular shape and cause hip dysplasia, which overall goes into osteoarthritis. And sometimes it can really be the diet. And obviously, calcium, vitamin D deficiencies, maybe not getting enough sunlight, really wears down the bones and causes that osteoarthritis. So do you guys have any questions over anything that I kind of hit upon, or maybe you want to ask some general questions or subjective questions towards what I have? And we can all chip in, really.
I don't really have a question, but when you mentioned that there are certain groups that had it more, or it showed more in them.
Right.
It brought me to my section of developmental dysplasia of the hip, and actually in the Japanese, they have developmental dysplasia, but they don't have osteoarthritis. It's very rare for them to actually have it.
And do you think that could probably be the diet or lifestyle of the Japanese?
I'm guessing diet mostly.
Right.
I feel like they're very healthy.
Like a lot
They
of,
have a very simple life, I would say.
like simple carbs or like fish with the omega-3s,
exactly. Yeah.
everything, right? So they're not going to develop like that weakening of the bone structure,
Right,
essentially,
exactly.
as quickly as say Americans or Europeans would.
Yes.
I would also probably say with the Japanese, they're not as sedentary as Americans.
That is
they
true
kind of
too, yeah.
walk everywhere and they're constantly working versus us take an Uber, drive your car.
Yes.
Right, it's a lot of walking,
So,
right?
Yes.
They're very healthy from the way, it just seems on the outer end as well. All right, so what about, let's go to the second points. Who had the second part after me?
Is it the environment part on the article? Is that what it's about?
So this one, the second part is the osteoarthritis of the hip is common and highly heritable.
Okay, so that should be mine.
Okay,
All
kick
right.
it off, man.
So, straight out, the article just starts with how common it is. It just states literally, osteoarthritis of the hip is extremely common. They did some studies over Dutch populations, all of them over the age of 55, which I will ask you all about that in just a moment. But what they found with the Dutch for populations over the age of 55, they did a radiographic, which is basically like an X-ray of their hips, and found that 50.9% of women and 14.1% of men suffer from this. And something I want to bring out later is apparently these hip shapes, they occur before people report signs and symptoms of these pains in the first place. So one question I do have y'all for just this instance is, why are all these studies being done in people over the age of 55? Why not pediatric populations? Because osteoarthritis, it could be many forms. It could be scoliosis, or like there are a lot of things that can happen, and it occurs over a really broad range of age demographics. So what's your thought on that? Why are we doing this with people who are older than 55?
So just to chip in, I think really it's just that you really want to focus on the majority of where these problems are happening, and that's going to be on older people, right? Because it's a bone density problem, and everyone knows, like, when you get older, all those functions start to dilapidate, and they just don't become really usable anymore. Especially like when you see old people, they're not, walking a lot, or they're not lifting, or they're not doing any work. They're trying to settle down in life, so they're becoming sedentary. So that irregular or even complete disuse of that bone and its structures is going to cause it to degrade. And a lot of times the food that we currently consume now, it's like saturated fats, it could be protein deficient, very enriched wheat fiber, so it's not going to be things that support organic growth in those bone tissues. So that's probably why we want to focus on that particular part of the population, instead of kids who are always going around. Sometimes they get hurt and everything, but they bounce back up really quickly. So it's more so like focus on a house fire instead of like a doghouse fire, in a sense, right? Focus on the bigger issue.
Focus on where the population's more prevalent, I guess.
Right.
Kind of like a use it or lose it situation.
Exactly. Use it or lose it, right?
Yeah, and I think another thing is that if we were to go younger, like for any instance, I think it's going to be much harder for kids to consent to it. Like, obviously their parents need to, and maybe they just don't feel comfortable with that. So I think it's going to be hard if we had the opportunity to go younger.
And then I would just say for like, sorry, I don't have to cut you off.
Yeah.
Just for like the research that was like later on, like in my part, they said like the odd ratios from like the ages that they would test, it like varied a lot. So I think they got the similar like numbers and all of that in the older groups that were like all collectively like having hip pain, having like discomfort and all that.
I think another point to add, and this actually relates to another class of mine, but we studied what was the maternal like health and practices, why they were pregnant with the child, and how that actually ended up influencing them.
Yeah.
Because that one was based more off of like cigarette smoking and if your child will be infertile, which they did somewhat show a direct cause. So it's like, okay, what were they doing in the 60s, 70s to be like, okay, maybe the hip's going to be a little deformed, maybe this joint's going to be a little deformed, to also see what happened.
But I'll get into it. Histograph with the hips in a little bit.
Great. So that's just the first part of that section in the article. Something I also discovered is apparently genome-wide associated studies. This is just straight from the article. They have identified regions of chromosomes 2, 4, 6, 7, 11, all the way up to 19, and X chromosomes as harboring important genes involved in the heritability of this disease. So something that I kind of wanted to relate to some of the things we learned in genetics. Has everyone here taken genetics already, or?
No.
Oh, no?
I've not.
Okay, well,
It like last year.
oh, that's great. Well, currently we're taking this class, and they introduced this concept of X-linked chromosome traits. I don't know if it's
Good old
recessive or dominant in this
mitochondrial
case, but I'm sure you've heard of it, right? So I was just kind of thinking, with osteoarthritis, is this possibly like an X-linked chromosome recessive trait? Like, is it probably because of the X chromosome acting as a carrier of these traits that people are being inherited? That's why it's so highly inheritable, because we know that we need 2 X chromosomes for there to be a female, and at least 1 X chromosome and a Y chromosome for there to be a male, right? So all living beings should have at least 1 X chromosome. So if it's X-linked, is that why it's so highly inheritable? What are y'all's thoughts on that?
I think you make a great point. I think that is a very good possibility. I didn't really get to, actually I didn't even think about that. I didn't like think to look into the chromosomes that it's on, but I do think you make a great point. It probably is like X-linked,
Yeah,
Oh, cool.
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I'm so sorry for bringing something forward. It's just something that popped in my mind.
I also had a question, really. So with certain chromosomes, are they latent in certain chromosomes along all of that as well, or is it just with those X chromosomes in particular, if you know?
Yeah, I wish I could tell you. So
For
we
sure.
know we have 46 chromosomes, right?
Right.
But we just so happen to have a sex-determinant chromosome, X chromosomes,
Right.
and Y chromosomes,
Right.
And these 4 numbers, I have no idea what they look like.
Those are just the main ones, basically,
Yeah.
is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, I have no idea.
For sure, for sure. I was just curious.
No, that's a great
I
question.
didn't know
just-
myself.
I wish I could answer you. I'm just, yeah.
Yeah, respectfully, yeah.
I think that also brings the question of like the women that are coming up with this.
Right.
It's like, do they already have hip problems like due to childbirth? Is that probably
Yeah.
like also a determinant factor too? Like, hey, it's kind of, you've already kind of got this hip problem going on. You're going to pass it on to your child. So I feel like that would also be interesting to see and go back and be like, hey, did you have any problems when you were pregnant, when you were giving birth? And see if that's just like also an after effect of that.
For sure.
Great points, great points. And just kind of go off on that. Oh, remember that statistic I brought up earlier with the Dutch population? Like there were more women that suffered from hip osteoarthritis than men. And just going on later in this article, it said around 49.1% of women actually reported the hip pain,
Yeah.
while 31%
Okay.
of men also reported hip pain. So it's just there's a higher ratio of that.
Yeah, and it
I
also.
And I
was
think
curious.
like also just to bring back the point of like being pregnant and all of that, like they don't really know if it's just like their hips, like because they're carrying
Mhm.
a whole nother human being, or like
Yeah.
if it's just like, oh, like I'm just in pain a little bit, like I'm
Right.
discomfort because of all that like weight specifically on like your pelvic floor and all that, and then you're carrying it all in your hips.
Yeah, so maybe it's
So,
just
like,
subjective,
yeah.
right? Like,
So I guess like it would be easier for them to report it after they were to like give birth and all that, but yeah, the question's pretty.
it's really good
Lots
insight,
of
man.
stress.
Yes.
Thanks, Mom.
Thanks, Mom.
All right, that's all I have for this section. Thanks, y'all.
All right,
For
perfect.
sure. Let's move on then.
So the next section is bone morphogenetic proteins and the Williams pathway, molecular links between joint shape and osteoarthritis. So really the key points here are that these pathways, they're formed in the limb buds, and these are sites of synovial joint formation. So like shoulders, hips, knees, elbows, you know. I'm pretty sure we talked about this in class.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Another key point, this signaling plays an important role in homeostasis, and it can activate, like if it's activated, it can cause cartilage breakdown. So this can remove the cushioning layer that reduces friction with our limbs, limits movement, and it's overall just uncomfortable.
Mhm.
So I didn't really have a question on this section so far. If you guys have any input, do you guys know anyone who kind of has like?
My grandma,
So-
she has arthritis. She's been taking steroids since like the 80s for her Crohn's, and
Right.
so the specific type of steroid she's on, it just deteriorated all that in between space. So it's
Mhm.
just bone on bone at this point.
Yeah. Is that the only medical treatment that's available for that? Like mainly steroids
don't-
or like therapy in a sense?
For the most part, steroids is the only one, but they don't tell you about all the like after effects of like, oh yeah, you take this for 40 plus years,
Kinda
you're gonna
chain
have
links and
arthritis.
medication.
Yeah, it's gonna break down that little
I-
in between space.
I feel like for those cases, it's more like preventative,
Mhm.
like catch it
Mhm.
early on so like it doesn't maybe get to that sense if not. And I think like each case is very like personalized, in the sense that like you don't know, like it could be just like one hip and not the other, or
Right.
like, you know, like in those working conditions, like say like somebody's lifting more than like another person,
Mhm.
they're gonna have completely different like
Types
assessments
of pain.
or like like if they go to a physical therapist office, like they're gonna
Mhm.
be completely treated differently.
Right, okay.
And you guys talking about like preventative medicine, that brings me to I saw somewhere, I was trying to see if there was a way to
Mhm.
prevent it, stem cell injections, and even cartilage repair
Mhm.
to like try and lessen how quickly it degenerates. And you know, I think like that's an important thing with this research, especially with this article. It just brings to light like how important this is and how painful it is for people
Mhm.
to not have the right care.
Right.
Um,
And there's no way to get cartilage back at all, right?
Right,
Yeah.
Like once it's gone, it's gone, huh?
And I think that's really cool that they're trying the whole like stem cells thing, because
Yeah.
like this whole like new idea of like new medicine and like
Mhm.
regrowing like certain
Mhm.
things that like we weren't able to before. I think it's really like game changing in the sense that like people who've been in pain their entire lives, like
Right.
it could change like
Yeah.
everything for them.
Or even people now, like in sports and everything, right? Like football
Yeah.
players, soccer players
Yeah.
are starting to see this in
And, like, it's not
their
career
30s,
ending.
mid 30s, and 40s, and it's a career ender. But now it could like maybe somewhat reverse this, if not even outright cure it. I mean, that would be pretty amazing.
I wonder if there would be like an artificial cartilage that we could like stick in there, so that way we
That's
don't
an
have to
idea
worry
too,
about
right?
deteriorating. Just
Artificial
stay there
cartilage.
the whole time.
Yeah.
I just use plastic.
Yeah, there we go. The silicone.
Yeah.
And easy. So the next section is developmental dysplasia of the hip, and this one is really quick, really small. I kind of brought this up earlier with the whole DDH and the Japanese and how they can have developmental dysplasia of the hip, but they really don't have osteoarthritis. But DDH, this is the most common cause of osteoarthritis in young adults. And that's really all this section is saying. So,
Cool.
like, I'd like to move on to acetabular dysplasia. This
Okay.
section really has a lot of, like, what's my train of thought?
Like conflicting data, or like
No, like a lot of, like, testing.
Okay.
Like, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
like
think
testing,
the next
right?
sections of the article is more like research
Yes,
and like
research.
what it's
Research.
explaining. The next two paragraphs are mine also, so
Yes.
you can like kick it off and then I can take it over if you need it.
Yeah, so that's what the word was. It was research.
Perfect.
But this basically is just talking about like different types of research, trying to see if do changes in acetabular shape happen before or as a result of osteoarthritis. And you know, there's several cases. I'll let you like, kind of get into that. But one that really stuck out to me was Wagner and colleagues. So they took 22 young adults and they underwent surgery for painful. Stay with me now.
Yes, ma'am.
Gotcha.
Femoral acetabular impingement.
There we go.
Yes.
Right.
It's gonna be in here.
And this, they found that hyaline cartilage showed dramatically increased immunohistochemical staining that shows several markers for osteoarthritis. Mind you, the mean age for these men, 30.4 years.
Wow.
So they're
Damn.
young.
30?
They're young.
They're young.
That's like my
Still
parents.
starting out
like,
life.
So basically, their findings, they showed evidence that molecular changes in cartilage resembled those of advanced osteoarthritis already underway.
Okay.
So that's kind of like what really stuck out to me in that section.
I want to go back to Sil's point about sports.
Sports,
Yeah.
right?
Like sports, they're kind of extreme, and especially with the mean age being like 30. Like that's guys coming out
fresh out
of
of
college,
Yeah, and they're-
did the
Yes.
sports, going back into professional sports.
Right.
So it's just like the
It-
body hasn't gotten a chance to break and repair itself.
Mhm.
Will have that break and
Exactly.
And
repair
it's
itself.
constant too.
So it's just constant boom, boom, boom. Like
And
if
I
we
can
looked,
imagine like also like they've been playing since they were like babies.
yeah, kids.
Yeah.
Like if we looked at the hips of Jordan Burroughs, a wrestler, like he's constantly slamming himself on the
Yeah.
back.
Wrestler,
I
boxers.
know,
yeah.
like those hips probably done. Probably already got
Those
the
hips
arthritis
don't
in
lie,
it.
those
They're gonna be
hips
Soccer
looking like they're 60
players.
when they're 30 years
Yeah.
old.
Yeah,
You've seen them, right? And sometimes on like walkers and wheelchairs and everything. Like, you know, Muhammad Ali was another example. Just like the generation, just like looked like a husk of himself, and he was still like very young in comparison to like a lot of his like seniors and elders and everything. But he acted like he was like a really old guy. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's kind of like the point with finding treatment for all these things, and especially sports-related professions, because it could really reverse a lot and give those years of life back to those people
Yeah.
who are basically putting their bodies on the line to make money.
Or to entertain us.
Or to entertain, really,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
It's huge, right?
I also wonder, like, with like military and different like styles of
That's
like
there too,
combat
yeah.
and
Same thing.
infantry, like if these
Mhm.
people are like having to constantly
Heavy equipment.
like
Heavy,
stay well,
heavy equipment on your back.
Carry.
I know, I've done it, carry heavy equipment up to 100 pounds, hike for 32 miles on all sorts of rugged roads, and then
Like stay in a
helicopter
bunker,
landings and everything,
being
and then
under
stay
that.
in like really small spaces. So, you know, things in the VA could really benefit from all of that as well.
Yeah. Give back.
Mhm.
I think the main point of this is we need to figure out what are the predetermining factors that are
Yes.
getting us
And
here.
how
Like,
can we
How can we
prevent
prevent
this
it?
from
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great point.
Exactly.
Great point.
Well, yeah, that's all I have for my sections.
All right,
Yes,
let's
so
kick
the
it
next
off.
section is going to be the pistol grip deformity and wide femoral necks. So going off of basically kind of what she said, the next portions are like mostly just studies that they're like that they have found that also can like help with their research. So with this, it's just kind of talking about like additional changes to the how do you say that?
Acetabulum.
Acetabulum structures, especially to like the femur specifically, and these have all been linked to
Osteo.
osteoarthritis.
There you go, teamwork.
Sorry, Miss Smith. Jokes on me. But just for the example, this whole like pistol grip deformity has just caused like overall like impingements on like the femoral head. So we did kind of talk about this in class, like how it sits correctly, like with our hips and how that like develops. But just to go more into it, they did have this study which I personally found like really interesting. They were comparing, first of all, it was 1,007 cases which like served clinical and like radiographic hips. So basically they're just taking pictures of like the hips and all that. And they recruited all the people from like ortho surgeries, and then like people who don't, so they have like a controlled variable and a not. And so they had a wide range of people who had osteoarthritis and people who didn't. And basically the numbers were significantly higher in showing like the association between the pistol grip deformity and hip osteoarthritis, meaning they're like linked together. So if you have one, you have the other. Because if you don't, then it wasn't shown at all in like the scans. And then there was another study where it was comparing men and women, and just like the prevalence of like the pistol grip deformity, and like the estimated is approximately like 8%. And this deformity may be more common in men than women, which I thought was a little different because we were just talking about like how women are the ones carrying like children and like all of that. So I wonder like how that's significantly different because it's more common in men than women.
Maybe like lifestyle, work.
Yeah, I don't really
choices.
know. Like I did try to like think about like other factors that could have gone in it, but they didn't really talk about it. So I think like that's a personal thing. Like I could probably research later and like get more facts about.
Yeah,
but
like it's a big question that the article kind of leaves in stasis, really, right?
yeah,
Like
just like open-ended like things that we can associate it with. And then yeah, it was just a lot more studies conducted, and then I think there was another study that just suggested like overall at the very end of that paragraph, just that the femoral neck widening may like very early on develop hip osteoarthritis. So I think for that, it's just saying like it will vary from every single person and like how they live their lives and all of that, just because like I could be doing like one thing with like my like legs and my pelvic floor and like working out every day, and then like somebody else could be doing something completely different, and like if they were to take a scan of both of us, they would be completely different structures and how they're sitting, how my femoral head is like angled and everything. So I thought that was also cool. And then that also leads me to, or any questions about that?
I wonder what's making like the head widen.
Yeah, like it didn't
That's
really
kind
go
of
the
into
neck.
specifics,
What's making
but
the
it
neck
was just
widen?
talking about more like the imaging and how it was shown. I wish they would have shown pictures on ours, which I'm sure we could have probably looked up too, but
right, because I can imagine it like pistol grip wide. Well, pistol grip wise, if that portion is just going around and around and around, I thought it would degrade, but I wouldn't imagine
Yeah, it
the actual
didn't
thing
say.
like flattening out, and looking like a mushroom head in a
like
sense,
just like
right?
widely like opened.
Like it
Which
gets
also
broader.
like what would fill in those gaps? Do you know what I mean? Because there would definitely be
Nothing.
like some type of gap formed.
Probably fat, something.
Yeah.
It's
in there.
weird, yeah.
And then the next area that I'm going to be talking about is the alterations of the femoral neck shaft and like its angle. So for this one, again, it was talking more about like how, more of like a positive, or let me start in the beginning, like the consensus regarding like the association of like the neck angle and then like the development of specific like hip osteoarthritis. With this study, like they're saying that there's like no association whatsoever, so kind of almost debunking what they were just researching in the paragraph before that. So this positive correlation is much larger, like as in like the 50% group that they did test, and then their smaller group was 51, and then for both like comparing those issues, it was about a 45 percentage. So, in like the whole osteoarthritis process. And then it later just goes on and just talks about like, in addition, like how likely all of this research just proves that it's a contribute, oh my lord.
Contributory? Oh,
Yeah,
words.
yeah,
Yeah.
to osteoarthritis as a whole. But yeah, and then so at the very end, in other words, like the difference in like the shapes or the femoral heads and the necks, we're just able to present on like pelvic radiographs. So this is just like before we're able to like deduct the evidence or like the radiographic hip arthritis, just in general. Furthermore, like the differences just between like the hip shapes, present, prior, and then like the development of osteoarthritis as a whole, it can lead to like hip replacements, which is like over a 6-year follow-up period, which I think, again,
Yeah.
going back to like the preventative and all of that, you don't want to spend 6 years of your life
Trying to replace
because
a hip.
trying to replace your hip,
Especially
because
dealing
of
with the
all of
pain,
that,
right?
And so that just indicates like your hip shape is very easily able to, like if you were to go get your hip scanned, with that information, you're able to go and predict like the severity of how well like your hips are able to carry osteoporosis. You know what I'm trying to
Osteoarthritis.
say. Sorry, Miss Smith, I'm really trying. But yeah, so go get your hip scan is basically what I'm saying, because it can prevent a hip replacement
Just
and
years
like a
along the line,
6-year
right?
Yeah.
follow-up. But yeah, that's pretty much it for mine.
And you know
Great
what?
points.
Speaking on, getting your scans early, I think it's also very important to understand if you have any genetic predispositions.
Yeah.
If you do, maybe go start doing
Yeah.
that now.
Yeah.
Yeah, just start looking with your grandparents and parents,
Yes.
seeing where the outliers are, then adjusting your lifestyle if you know that that's going to be a prevalent factor in anything related to osteoarthritis. And really prevention is the best medicine. So if you want to save the rest, like the latter part of your years, just do what you need to do and just get all that imaging, get your general things scanned out. And I think overall it's going to lead to just a much better quality of life
Yeah.
if you do
Or
that.
like early on, if you are feeling pain, like just go see the doctor. Like get those, like you were saying, like get the preventatives done. So like if you do need to go to physical therapy, like strengthen your hips, because your hips like can cause your knees problems. It can cause like so many other things problems. And it's just like if you just take care of yourself in the beginning, like when you're first feeling it, you'll live a very happy life.
Never hurts to get a checkup.
Yes. Yearly checkups.
All right, does anyone else have
Hey.
anything to add?
I think it's to you now.
Okay, so I'm focusing on the global shape of the proximal femur. So originally they were using linear measurements that were either measured manually or electronically on the radiographs, which yes, it showed, but it didn't do a very good job. So they switched to a technique called ASM, which is the automated shape analysis. And so with that one, you can see the femur shape a little bit better in the hip osteoarthritis and how it degrades. It's a statistical model, and so it's able to see more of the proximal shape versus the traditional geometric measurements, which helps them determine it just a little bit more. And so when Lynch and his colleagues did this, they studied it in elderly women that have fractures, so not complete osteo breaks, but just fractures. And so they found that the size and the shape of the head and neck at the baseline were huge indicators in predicting if whether or not they had the osteoarthritis. And so there's actually 3 distinct shapes that are associated with osteoarthritis, and then their ranges are ranging from 1.73 to 2.31. So the shape of mode 3, which is the one that you're probably going to see the most, it's like the common most determinant factor, like, oh, that's a mode 3 shape.
Yeah.
That means you have it. that had the most variability and overall proximal femur shape of the three identified, and it was characterized by a larger femoral head and a longer, slightly thinner femoral neck. So it's probably like head too big for your body, like it's not balancing out
Like a
right.
baby.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
And these are kind of just like the predicting factors, right? To go with a trend. Okay. I get that.
Yeah. And so it's like kind of reinforcing the idea that the hip shape does determine the development of the osteoarthritis, or at least when they're pulling it up on the radiographic images, like, oh, this hip is shaped a little bit weird. Let's just go ahead and assume they have it.
yeah.
So what are y'all's thoughts on that?
I think I love how they did it on old elderly women specifically, just because like, again, we already talked about like old people in general, but like women more than men, just because like obviously you can tell obviously the difference if they've had kids in their lifetime or if they hadn't, going back to that whole discussion. But I would have loved to see like an elderly men, like to comparison, like that would be also cool just to see like, because what if they have like different shapes that aren't found or listed in these like type 3 or type, or what'd you say, type?
So there's three main types that
Yeah,
they look
those
for.
3 types.
I would also like to see the study really done in like different regions of the world.
Yeah.
You know, because we've seen like with the Japanese, you know, they have a lot of the precursors, but not the actual ailment of osteoarthritis. And
Yeah.
then we know for America, but I'm curious to like see maybe in like hardier countries like maybe Norway, Sweden, or even like really warm climate countries, kind of like the Arabic Peninsula or like maybe South Africa. I just would be curious to see like how that plays out too.
Yeah.
Because maybe diet and lifestyle is a much more significant factor than we think at first.
Yeah.
So that's just something I wanted to input into that. I thought that would be really interesting. All right.
Any other
I think
thoughts?
we can go into the conclusion then.
All right, perfect. So, in the conclusion, they kind of pull together most of the points that they talked about, but they are mainly stressing that the joint shape is a huge important determinant of if you have hip osteoarthritis or not. That is such a hard word to say. Okay. And so it's also talking about the shape of the diarthrial joint is also a determinant. And so that kind of, like it says, just goes in with it. And what else? So they're looking for more disease preventions and treatments now, because like with arthritis, you can take medications, you can try physical therapy to build the strength back up, but like we said, you can't rebuild that cartilage. You can't rebuild what you lost. So now they're trying to figure out how to build what you lost and how to save what you have left, basically at this point. But yeah, what do you think?
All right. I
Closing
mean,
points. I know on like the description of this, it was like, why is this research important? And so I had wrote down a point, and I basically just said that bridging developmental biology and osteoarthritis. And from that, I said this establishes a connection between genetics, joint shape, and disease progression, helping explain why some individuals are more prone to osteoarthritis than others. You know, just I don't think people realize that there's so many factors going into one disease, like one predisposing factor. And I think if we understand that, and if we get more of that information out there to the general public, you know, they're more willing to go get the screenings, to be cautious of their health, to, I don't like, you know,
To
be
take care of
healthy.
themselves.
Yeah.
Like, and
Overall
I think
wellness, right?
Also for
Yeah.
like people our range, like it's amazing that we're able to even be able to read this article and understand that like we also need to take care of ourselves now before we get there.
Yeah, we should start doing unskippable YouTube ads, you know, to make this 30 seconds long.
Yeah.
We should.
All right. And then, well, does anyone have any other concluding thoughts before we close it out? All good?
I got
All right. So this is Group 3's roundtable discussion. This is the conclusion. Once again, I'm Sewell,
Diamond.
Vivian,
Sayari.
Island.
signing out.
Bye.
Bye.
thanks, Miss Smith.
Donate to my Patreon.
Okay, we're gonna have to redo that.
That was good. I think that was really good.
Really good. It felt very nice.
That's
It
a
was
100 if
good.
I ever seen one.
I'd be surprised we don't win
No,
this.
we can't.
If we don't win this.
Yeah.
Cause that girl's gonna. Cause when that girl came in,
I think that's fine.
No, it's fine.